boys and girls, welcome to Story Time. Today we're going to read a story about the ancient and modern philosophers and try to answer the age-old question, does the rightness of a government depend on the consent of the governed? Ready? Okay, here we go. 'Twas the dawn of philosophy. Sparta needed direction, and Lycurgus came up with a simple correction.
I have a plan. Lend me your ear. Follow the clan and never leave here. We'll have strength in our numbers, for we shall rid of the weak. We'll share all our earnings, invent currency that's totally unique.
Spartans lived for many years isolated. The city grew powerful while the family connections abated. Then came Antigone, whose brother had died, and King Creon forbade his burial, so she broke down and cried. For she believed that the family came first, and Creon's law against honoring him by the gods would be cursed. Creon believed Thebes, the city, was most important, then lost his wife and son before realizing that was discordant. In the end, they both learned that taken to an extreme, their values could rob them of a life that's serene. Then along came Plato, who became suddenly aware that citizens were just slaves who were chained to their chairs. Politicians were poets with one great ambition, to get all the people to believe their opinions. They cast shadows in the cave to get citizens to behave. But Plato said,
"Go outside and be brave. Outside there is light, the truth and the good."
They loosened their chains and at last understood. Aristotle was brave, and the cave he did ban, and saw that telos was the true nature of man. The mightiest oak springs from an acorn so small, and we're truly political animals after all. He said,
"Only together can we all be more. A great-souled man is something worth living for."
St. Augustine said Aristotle's philosophy was vain, and not to give God credit was completely insane.
God is in charge, not the city of man. If we don't give him credit, government will be damned. Citizens should honor God first in his wisdom and follow the leader and laws of the kingdom.
Descartes used mathematics to promote technology, and controlling nature was his prime strategy. Beginning with a point of origin, which is doubt,
"We'll create a system of knowledge."
he said with a shout.
A foot is a foot, we all can agree. With numbers we'll create homogeneity. Philosophy is science, that we all can agree. By working together, we'll promote society. By using this matrix, we could all escape death and never face taking our very last breath. Just 4 simple rules and this method will work, and escaping death is just one of the perks. Step 1, never accept anything to be true unless it's distinct and clear to you. Step 2, problems are something you must devise. This makes them easier to analyze. Step 3, order your thoughts from easiest to complex. And 4th, make enumerations about your subjects. And last but not least, remember, doubt is the center of life. From that starting point, you can end all strife.
Hobbes said,
Life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, and speech is only used to distort. Man's nature is basically controlling and suspicious. Without a sovereign, life would be vicious.
Locke believed faith, forced by the powers that be, could only lead to hypocrisy.
What we need to succeed is toleration, because a faith of your own is the only salvation. The way to achieve this is to remove church from state and make civil interest the sole duty of magistrates.
Rawls proclaimed that a veil of ignorance is what's needed in order to ensure that mankind succeeded. The state cannot legislate morality. The goal of government must be neutrality. Every citizen must be given a choice for true liberty. If you don't like the law, just agree to disagree. Sandel called this neutrality bracketing and believes it's really just a false thing. When laws make it possible for one to be denied, by default government's chosen a side. This means that consent has been implicitly given, and government's actually morally driven. Grant and Sandel are not poets in the cave. They make us think to loosen our chains. In this day and age, humans decide and impose. The world is something we artfully compose. The truth is, modern commitment is to equal rights for some, and creative will is our rule of thumb. Equal rights and liberty actually come from the Bible and ancient philosophy. A well-ordered soul is simply a must to live a good life that is moral and just. So now that you've heard ancient and modern perspectives from some of the greatest thinkers of all time, what do you think the answer to our question is? Does the rightness of government depend on the consent of the governed?
I would say that this question can only be answered in relation to what the end goal of said government would be. If the end goal is to build a society to control a society of animals bent on their own destruction, then no, the people need not consent. However, if Hobbes is wrong, and the majority of people are not as wicked as he says, then government does need consent to be righteous. Otherwise, the ambitious few will take advantage of the giddy multitude, just as Locke said. I personally would even argue that government, as it is, causes more problems than it solves.
I think that the rightness of a government does depend on the consent of the governed. If you think about it, Antigone was not pleased with the rules of King Creon, and this caused much disturbance in the kingdom. The ruled and the ruler suffered greatly, leading to the demise of a society. If Creon had listened to Antigone, things could have gone differently, and the society could have prospered.
For me, I think that the rightness of government does not count on the consent of the governed. Like with Rawls, I think that there ultimately will be a veil of ignorance for the people, but unlike Rawls, I do not think that consent given under this veil of ignorance is true consent, and therefore cannot determine the rightness of a government.
So, as you can see, in a room with only 3 people, we have 3 different conclusions. Imagine what that means in our democracy here in the United States, with over 330 million citizens. These are our opinions. What's yours?